Imagine if all the innovators of the last millennia followed the rules and didn't. They all needed to break a rule in order to get that big next thing.
Welcome to the Manders Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome back to Manders Mindset. As always, I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am here today with Gabi Morales. And Gabi and I are going to get into a lot of things today. And we're going to talk a little bit about spirituality and how to make sure you are actually connected with your soul and your intuition and not being misguided by that. And I am here with Gabi today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I like to start my podcast with a nice way to kind of lighten the load, because a lot of times we talk about heavy topics. So I typically start asking the guests what their hooray for the day is. So some positive moment of gratitude, anything that brought you a hooray for the day.
Well, it's pretty early in the day today, but right before jumping on this call, I was talking with my sister and my nephew, and I just usually love connecting with him and getting a kick out of all the things that he's doing. And yeah, that's my hooray for this very early morning.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So can you tell us who Gabi is at the core?
Sure. Gabi, at my very core, is someone who is so dedicated to my own spiritual work, because that allows me to really help people connect to their own spiritual core. And I don't know that there's anything more important that I feel for my life.
Can you tell us about your family, your background, upbringing, the layout of your family, any siblings, anything you want to share with that?
Sure. So I was born in Nicaragua. It's in Central America. A lot of people are always like, where's that? And I moved with my parents, went to Miami when I was about 4. And a few years after that, my sisters were born. So I'm the eldest of 3 girls. I come from a family that holds a lot of power, I would say, in their lineage when it comes to magical and psychic abilities. So that started to come online for me as a small child. Communicating with other beings, being able to read energy and tell my mom what was actually going on. And in that, there was a lot of things that were hard for my parents to deal with, because I was a very awake child. And as it happens, for most children, as life goes on and things aren't validated, the intuition and everything starts to shut down. And the lack of confidence and trust starts to kick in, because I was seeing so much more than what they were and experiencing so much more than what they were. And it's not because they couldn't, but they just weren't attuned to it. They had learned to also suppress it. Because my dad is one of the most intuitive people I know. And so there was a lot of kind of inner conflict for me growing up. And so it's been quite a journey in learning how to move or release all of that lack of confidence and trust in myself, for lack of going into tons more detail, and really learning how to trust what I was seeing, what was in the information coming to me, because that has proven over and over again in the last 40 years that what I see and what I get is more real than what other people are actually trying to get me to believe, if that makes sense.
I get what you're saying. So you mentioned it was hard for your parents because you were so awake. Can you elaborate a little bit on why it was so hard for them?
Well, because I would tell them things that I had no proof. I couldn't, as a young child, 4 or 5 years old, how am I going to prove that this person is not reliable? Until they realized 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years later, that this person was really not reliable. Just things like that. Or when I told them that I was seeing, certain beings, they're like, what is that? That doesn't exist. Or when I was telling them about my past life memories and things that I had experienced, they're like, no, you haven't. Like, this is your one life. Because even with all of that, I come from a very Catholic family, So there was that in the background as well, But when I'm blanking on the age, but many years, I was maybe in my early 30s. I had an experience where I was like fully engrossed in the energy of this place that I had visited, and I hadn't experienced something like that. And it was very powerful. And I was talking to my mom the day after. And I was used to at that point not sharing everything that I experienced in that way with her, because it just wasn't, she couldn't wrap her head around it. But something just it was so powerful. I just had to share it with her. And I was like, do you think that's weird? I was very cautious about it. And she's like, no. She's like, you've been doing this since you were born. And I was like, what? And we ended up having this conversation where she validated so much of what I told her throughout the years, especially as a child and things like that. And just that conversation itself was like super healing for me, because and then it was 25 years later, I was like, oh my God, she really saw, she learned to see, because things in that moment, there was no proof. But like I said, eventually she started to see that what I was telling her was accurate. And I just didn't have that validation from her until all of those years later.
Now, sisters have any gifts like this? Were they able to read energy?
Not in the same way. One of my sisters doesn't believe in any of this stuff, but every now and then she'll ask me something because she's curious. Another one of my sisters, the one that I was just speaking to, she's very sensitive to energy. She doesn't. I think she can definitely wake up that ability in herself if she wanted to, for sure. But I don't think I had the same experiences that I have had. Maybe there's something about being the eldest. I don't know.
But your parents weren't getting that from either of your other sisters? Basically.
No, not in the same way. I mean, my little sister, the one that I was just talking to, she did go around saying for many years that she was an alien, and she really believed us. And believed it. And she would give us like details of what planet she was from. And I mean, it became like a joke and we played with it. But I don't know, maybe she really did believe in it and really was getting that information. I don't know. But no, it isn't exactly the same.
No, I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So now that's a little bit about your childhood. And then from there, I get what you're saying about the Catholic family, because my family is very Roman Catholic as well. So it can be a challenge going against the norm, even within your family, even small little ways, like, this is the traditional thing we do. You go to school, you go to college, you get married, you have kid. Like, I'm not like that. I am fully the black sheep of my family, so I relate to that. But so from there, from your childhood, then where'd you go?
I did the college thing. But Catholicism was such a big part of my upbringing. And not because I bought into it, I actually rebelled against it from a very young age. I was like, a bunch of this is bullshit. Even as a young kid. And I was a little rebellious, maybe a lot more than I care to admit right now. And I used to play little tricks with my mom because we had like those like wall plaques with holy water in them. You know, going out of every door and there was a holy water.
Yeah.
There was a couple times where I pretended that I was being exorcised just to get just to rile up my mom. You know, you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. But I just, from a very, very young age, I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Like the virgin birth doesn't make sense. What does that say about women? Like you'll never be able to live up to that, mom. Like I'll never be able to live up to that. I don't want a virgin birth. Like that's ridiculous. Why is that like the epitome of, I'm like, I don't want to bypass the other step. Like do me a favor.
That is so point though.
Like there was just a lot of things like that. A lot of the dogma around it was so ridiculous to me, even at a young age. And the thing is that those things continue to be ridiculous to me. So whatever. But growing up in such I have nuns and priests in my family. Like and it was just so wild to me how many people really bought into these ideas that I just could never wrap my head around. And so I ended up studying theology and world religions. And that was one of my majors in college. Like, I need to understand this. Like, this needs to make sense to me. And what I left with was not really not the type of understanding that made me want to or brought peace in terms of, I understand where they're coming from and now I can join them. Not that kind of understanding. It was more of the understanding of the type of control and programming that comes with so many organized religions and how people are controlled by that, are moved in droves by that, and how our individuality is sapped and demonized, and the herd mentality is set in. So I left with that understanding, and which is ironic because then I did end up in a spiritual cult for many years. So there's a lot of irony in my life as well. And I own it, and it is what it is. But that experience further solidified that learning, that overall learning that I had in college and studying all the religions. Now, my focus was mysticism. It became mysticisms, and mysticism is quite different than the organized religions because it breaks the mold. Every religion has an aspect of mysticism, but you don't need to. Mysticism can occur outside of religion as well. But it's basically that connection, that giving of yourself over to the divine, whatever that divine is to you. But it is that, I don't know if you've ever felt that, but like if you've been talking to source or to God, or the goddess, whatever people want to call it, and it's like this warm feeling in your heart, and it just spreads and takes over. That's like the most basic way I can explain it. But it's that practice, of having a very personal and intimate relationship with source, with the divine, with the creator. Like I said, it doesn't even matter, what packaging you put it into, what belief system it is. Because when you really look at all mysticisms, all mystic practices, at the core, it is that incredibly intimate, very particular kind of love that just takes over and radiates throughout your whole body. And it dictates really that's don't know, I don't really like that word, but it really infuses into every area of your life. Because when you've had that kind of connection, you don't see yourself or other people in the same way. So that's why the mystics of any religion really had more in common with themselves than anything else. Does that make sense?
So now you studied theology in college.
World religions, yeah.
Okay. What did that help you learn the most, would you say?
Well, that basically while there are some decent teachings, you can even find some decent teachings in Catholicism, as much as I'll shit on it all the time. There's still pretty decent teachings, a lot of what Jesus said is beautiful and we can still learn from it. But most organized religions, especially the ones from, the major ones, are really tools for control. And so that's what when you look at the history of it and how they evolved, they were very political, especially the Roman Catholic Church, incredibly political. So that is the overall learning that was very much solidified in learning all these religions. And also the mystic part of it, that when you take away the dogma and you just focus on that connection, it is the same across the board, no matter what your background is, no matter, whether you believe in Allah or Jesus or Shiva. Once you connect from your heart, the rest really doesn't matter. So, but the institutions themselves are genius at control and moving in a very political way. And we're still seeing that. So,
yeah, no, it's so true. And but something that never sat right with me about Catholicism is it seemed very judgmental to me. You say love thy neighbor, but the gays can't get married in the Catholic Church. And I'm like, how is this fully accepting of people? And the gays not being able to marry is just one example that personally never sat right with me, because I have gay friends who weren't accepted in the Roman Catholic Church. And it's just been sad to me. Even friends I grew up with that grew up Roman Catholic and are gay and are not accepted within the religion and the church they grew up in. I was raised Roman Catholic, baptized before I could even walk, got all the first communion, confirmation, everything. And it's just we say in the Catholic Church how love thy neighbor, but they don't practice what they preach.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the last 500-600 years, the institution that has created the most war and bloodshed in the world has been the Catholic Church. I mean, it was the impetus for so much of colonization, and not just recently in these last 400 years or whatever, but also throughout Europe. Before it even left the European continent, it really is a political machine. And when you see it that way, it almost, for me at least, it's obvious that a lot of what they say or how they choose to practice it doesn't matter, because once you have people believing in your message, they will do almost anything in the name of, and it's so much easier to get people to follow a certain agenda when they think that it's for the greater good, even if it means killing people, even if it feels like genocide is the way to go. And the Roman Catholic Church has been behind a shit ton of genocides. So not forget the gays, not, but let's go back even further. They've been doing this from the very beginning. So to me, it's almost crazy. And like I said, my family is very Catholic. So if you're watching this, it's not you. Sorry. But like, you know, it's just, it's a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of mind control and emotional control for political agendas. And the thing is that there's a lot of people that really buy into it and don't see the fullness of the history of it. You know, or even if they learn a little bit here and there, they find ways to justify it. But that goes back to, you know, what we were talking about before. It's that cult mentality, because a lot of times people think, and I'm jumping into something else, but a lot of times people think that, you know, cults are this very specific type of group. And like the ones that we heard, like from Waco, or like, I can't think of them right now, you know, like these very extreme things that only happen in like very small percentages across the world. But the truth is, most organized religions, especially, you know, at the local level, can really operate as a cult. And like you see more and more people, like experts coming, like really focusing on helping people heal religious abuse, organized religious abuse, because there really is no difference. Like the what happens in the level of sapping people's power away and making them conform and removing them from their own intuition, their own wisdom. That is what religion has been doing forever. Now, I'm not saying there isn't wisdom in any of it, that it's all devoid of that, because it's not. They got it, you know, there always is a little bit of, in big lies, there's always a little like threads of truth in there. And that's why it gets so confusing to people, you know? So I think I said a lot and went in there.
I want to backtrack just a tad, but you did mention how you ended up getting into a spiritual cult. How did that happen, especially when you were so anti-religion almost?
I'm telling you, irony.
I gotta say, I'm surprised even more so.
You know, it is what it is. There's things I came here to learn, and I learned. But I found them when I went to their organization doing research for school, and I kept going, and I met people that I liked. Because even though like I said, from a very young age, even though I felt like I was always railing against Catholicism, I always had my own connection to God. Like I've never had a problem with God. You know, my problem was never with God, was in the way people were telling me that I had to relate to God. That was my problem, you know? And that was when I had that, when from a very young age, anytime that I was communicating and connecting with God, that experience was so different than what I was being taught in Sunday school, you know? And so, yeah, I feel like I forgot your question.
How did you get into the cult in the first place?
Right. So just that, I went doing research for school, and I just started meeting people that I liked. It was interesting. They kept saying, we're not a cult. And I believed them. I was 19.
They said to you they're not a cult?
Yeah, they're like, we're not a cult. We're very, you know, do everything. Like, we're not going to force you to do anything. This is everything that's available, and you choose. And I did for a long time. But little by little, like the programming was setting in. The shame, you know, there was a lot of shaming tactics. And when you're not, you know, because even though like I was smart, quote unquote, in many ways about the Catholic Church and things like that, I still had a lot of self-trust issues. I wasn't solid in my self. besides the fact that I was 19, there was a lot of childhood trauma that I hadn't worked through yet. So I wasn't fully in my power. I was nowhere near standing in the fullness of my power. And so in that state, it's very easy to allow for that programming to come in and to set in, and for the ideas about yourself from other people to matter more and to shape how you start seeing yourself. So there were a lot of really sophisticated shaming tactics, that came in the form of like, you're great, but, and I can't think of them exactly right now, but, it was just years of that until, fast forward several years, my intuition, like my soul was like almost yelling at me, and I couldn't ignore it. And my body was breaking down too, like with autoimmune issues, with, all this stuff, because there had been for a long time something inside of me that was telling me like, this is not okay. But my mind was like, no, like this is what I chose to believe. And if I don't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm going to lose the merit, because that's what they told us, to be close to the Creator. And when you see like that to someone like me who had really relied on that connection with God since a really young girl, that was like hell on earth for me, like losing the merit to connect to the Creator, until something clicked and was like, that is the most ridiculous thing. But it took a long time of my soul like trying to get my attention, of like, that does not make sense, and that. And then it was a whole process of just building myself up enough to remove myself from that situation.
So now you say you were doing research for school. What kind of research, if you don't mind me?
Yeah, no, because one of my majors was theology, like really world religions, but I had two majors at the same time. The other one was anthropology. And so I did, yeah. So
I majored in that as well.
Right. I love anthropology. I still watch like so many documentaries. I love it. But I did a lot of field research. And so because my focus ended up being mysticism, that was how I was bridging both majors. So I did a lot of research in like mystic traditions. And that's how I got into this organization. And what's funny is that I researched and I participated from an anthropological perspective. With
anthropological lens.
Exactly. But in other organizations, other groups, and it didn't happen. Like it didn't have the same outcome. But they weren't trying to recruit me either.
The other place you went?
Right. They were fine like sharing with me and inviting me in as a guest, but they weren't trying to actively recruit me. They knew why I was there. They were clear on that, and they respected that.
I love how you mentioned about giving your power away, and I think so many of us do it and don't even necessarily realize we are doing it. Even in small little everyday instances, whether it's saying yes to something you don't want to say yes to, staying with that toxic partner that you're in a relationship with, whatever it may be. So many of us give our power away and give our voices away. And I love the comparison you made there.
Yeah. And, like I said, it's very easy to see the dynamics of a cult, within what is considered, by most standards, a cult, like this type of organization. But the truth is, when you really get into the psychology of cults and how that happens, you start seeing those dynamics everywhere. They're all over society. Like you said, there's very little difference. I mean, there's a difference, but in terms of giving away your power, Like if someone is in a toxic relationship and they feel like they must remain there for whatever reason, you're giving away your power and you're allowing yourself, you're telling yourself all the reasons why you need to stay there and why you deserve that kind of treatment and why it's okay to whatever, all these things. The same happens within a cult. You know, the way that people give away their power to things like sports teams, or that they bet and then they actually get into conflict with other people about, you know, or like all these things. There is an aspect of giving away your power. The way that we so blindly believe what the government tells us. Now, let's not get into a political conversation because that's going to derail it. But you know what I'm talking about, because there's people that like really blindly believe in everything that the media and society tells us, you know? And I am by far a conspiracy theories, but there's some truth in what some of these people say. You know what I mean? And so they take it to certain places, but you see that dynamic of giving away your power to so many things, even to food sometimes. So it's to food, it's to the way that you look, that other people are going to perceive you. It could be so many things that people give their power away to. It could be multiple things. And that's the thing. If you're giving your power away in one area of your life, chances are you're giving your power away in multiple areas of your life. Because when someone knows how to stand in their power, that is across the board. And so one of the ways that I see when people are not in their power is their energy is leaking. Now, for someone that reads energy, like it looks a certain way. I mean, it could look differently for everyone, but you don't have access to your full energy, to your power source, to your life force. Does that make sense? So it's like you're constantly having to feed off of that thing that you're giving your power away to. And that thing is not permanent. That thing is outside of yourself. And that is the message that we keep getting from the time that we're kids. Because a lot of society, again, I will say it, does operate from a cult dynamic, from a cult perspective. You know, because we are taught as children to listen and to put more authority out, like more weight in the authority outside of ourselves than learning how to follow the authority inside of ourselves. So it is so, you have adults, and I know so many people that come to me that have such a hard time making basic decisions, like basic everyday decisions. If that is you, if you have a problem, and it's not because you're a Libra, because everyone's like, well, I'm a Libra. I'm a Libra too. I have 5 planets in Libra, so I don't buy that bullshit. You know, it has nothing to do with that. But you can be a Libra and be very decisive and know what is right for you. You know, so that is no. But a lot of people have huge issues with making the most simple decisions. That is one of the biggest signs that you're not standing in your power, when you can't make a simple everyday decision. And that is true, like I said, of so many people. Because, again, we've been taught that the truth is outside of us. That this organization, that this reality, that this, you know, the government knows, your doctor knows better, and none of that is true. This world would look very different if we were taught how to, as young children, how to really develop that connection with our soul, with our intuition, with the energetics around us.
Yeah. I love how you mentioned even giving our power away to food. I think so many people overlook giving our power away and only assume it's to another person. Whereas I talk about fitness, health, nutrition, weight loss a lot on the podcast because I've got my own history with that. And it's so true. So many of us give our power away to food. It can be giving our power away to anything. Hell, it could be drugs. It could be alcohol. It could be any vice you're addicted to.
Media.
Yes, like the list goes on. But I also really like how you touched upon the government. It breeds like this sense of dictatorial control. Like I saw a meme, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but something along the lines of, how messed up is it that we don't let kids just eat or use the bathroom whenever they need or want to at school? Like, I'm sorry, but like, kind of mind-blowing to me. As a kid, it doesn't seem as like whatever because you grow up and you're used to it. But now that I'm an adult, I'm like, I can remember teachers telling me, can't go to the bathroom yet. What do you mean I can't go to the bathroom? And you know, we are conditioned from such a young age to follow the rules. Even if you think about, we're standing in line, going to recess, even basic little things, which I get you want it to be orderly so the kids aren't hitting each other, what the fuck ever. However, it still breeds this cult-like mentality, you know, and like, these are the rules, this is what you do, and we wonder why society is like, you go to school, you go to college, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, you know?
Yeah. Imagine if all the innovators of the last millennia followed the rules and didn't. They all needed to break a rule in order to get that big next thing.
So how did you transition from being in the cult to leaving the cult?
It was one of the most powerful experiences of my life, really, because I had already several years in of fighting myself, of fighting my intuition to the point where I just couldn't. I couldn't. Like I said, it just took over. My soul was like, get out of the way, bitch. I'm being funny, but it was that level of like things breaking down for me. Like, you know, listen. And it was the first time that I allowed myself to be fully guided by my soul, by the intelligence coming through me. And I could not explain it to anyone. There was no logical reason behind what I was doing. Because I had certain friends that were open to hearing what I said, but my best friend, who has also left, and we've been on this healing journey together for the last 13 years or so, you know, and she tells me, she's like, when you started coming to me and telling me these things, I was so worried about you. I thought we were going to have to stop being friends because that's what we were told, you know? And so, and all these, she's like, but the more you talked, the more I felt truth into it, even though it didn't make sense. Like logically, it didn't make sense. And so it still took her several years before she fully left. But I just gave myself over to that to my soul and what it was telling me to do. And what I did is I went into like a certain type of isolation, not completely, because I still had to do certain things in the world, but I sat with myself for months, like 8 months. And I examined all of these beliefs, because there are some things, some beliefs that I learned in that organization that weren't all bad. You know, it was just the application of it. It is what how they distorted it to mean, and, you know, and all that. And so I really sat with myself for like 8-9 months alone. Like I barely went out. I spent my time in meditation, journaling. And do I believe this? Is this true for me? What is the implication of this in my life? And I took one by one, and I let go of so much. I let go of all the community, which was and it was a huge grief process, because there was a lot of mourning. There was mourning of what I thought my life was going to look like, because in being in that organization, there was a lot of things that were already set from my life and my trajectory, like who I was going to marry, like, you know, who my friends were going to be, what, like, there was a very structured, it was a very structured lifestyle. So many things were already set for me. But it was like letting go of all of that. And some things were a lot easier to let go of than others. Some things were like, thank God, you know, but there was whole communities, because this was a worldwide, it is a worldwide organization. And there were communities all over the world, and we got to know each other. And so releasing all these friendships, all these connections was very painful, you know, and I'm someone that does thrive in a community. I love sharing with people. Even though I'm an introvert, I have my moments of like wanting to socialize and things. So, but the community was the hardest thing to do. But I realized, and I didn't know where any of this was coming from, but I knew that staying connected to people that were still connected to that organization wasn't going to serve me, wasn't going to help me heal and move away from these patterns, because they're very insidious, like, you know, like these beliefs that start to set in, and like beliefs are very powerful things. And we can talk about that at another time or whatever, but the what you believe really shapes your perception of the world and yourself, and really dictate how you relate to the world and yourself. And so I just took all those months to examine all those beliefs. And I let go about, I would say about 85 to 90% of my life. I dissolved in those 8 months.
I think it's really crucial that you mentioned about grieving and mourning what you thought life was going to be, because regardless of what the situation is, whether it's a romantic relationship, a career, any type of ending, it's likely affecting what our future is going to look like. So making space to be able to grieve that, I think, is so important. But wow, that must have been an intense 8 months for you.
Those were, yeah, those first 8 months were incredibly intense, but it really took several years. And the grief, that grief that you mentioned was several years, you know, of just feeling, because then it was rebuilding my life. Because now I'm like, where do I start? I was like 32, 33 maybe. And I felt like I had just left college for the first time, you know, or like, you know, when you just leave college, everything, you have to start from scratch. And that's how I felt. Like I had lived in a bubble for a long time. And so, and it was relearning how to operate in the secular world. So it was several years before I could say that I found like a stable footing. But it was definitely like different layers and phases of it. But the grief over the community was one of the strongest ones. But what sustained me was my connection with the Creator, with God. I'm like, that's not going anywhere. And it actually even intensified, you know. And to me, it was one of the most beautiful things, because that is what I was mostly scared of. That is why I ended up staying for so long, because I was scared that I was going to lose that connection. But I didn't. That was one of the biggest lies that I bought into.
Oh, that's great that it increased and improved your connection. So now, have you at any point found yourself, a lot of people have, where they realized something about their life, something about the world around them, and you had an aha moment and you just knew something differently, you were going to approach life in a different way? Would you say you've had any major aha moments?
I think it was that. Those were a lot of aha moments that were solidified and this huge event. Absolutely. But there were a lot of aha moments that led me to making that final decision of I need to go.
I bet. How long has it been you left?
It's been between 9 years, more or less. Because it was gradual. It wasn't like, one day a piece. It was gradual.
That makes sense. And now I'm sure this whole process helped you really connect more with yourself, your soul, and your intuition. And now how are you able to help other people connect with themselves more?
I love doing that. Well, I can see what's in the way, not just because of all that I've experienced, and I'm so familiar with that, but energetically, I can help people really see and connect to what is in the way. And mind you, like, you don't have to have had a super dramatic event like I did to have a blockage to connecting with yourself. Because like we were talking about earlier, from the moment we're children, we're taught to ignore our own, like, even like you said, like not going to the bathroom when we need to, like we're training our own body to ignore its signals. That's crazy. So, it's identifying what those blockages are and the impact that they're having in different levels of your life, and then working through them, either one by one, or sometimes you work on a big one and it like slowly releases like some other ones, but it's a process. It's definitely like not a one and done thing. Like I said, it wasn't even just those 8 months. It was several years of really learning how to be my own authority, like fully stand in my power. Like, depending on what you have been through, the process is different for everyone. And we haven't even touched on this, but a lot of times past lives do play a role in this, and so there's just so much that can be touched upon when it comes to what is actually in the way of you truly making that strong and stable connection with your soul. And not just that, but allowing it to lead. Because that requires a certain amount of mastery, like when it like to the mind, and to the human impulses and your ego, and then learning how to integrate all of it. And, because I also don't buy into this idea that we have to eradicate our ego and we make our ego a bad, evil thing about us. I don't buy into that. It has an important role, but it's learning how to incorporate all those different parts of ourselves and still letting the soul lead. So it's definitely a process. And I feel like I overuse this other term, a journey, so much. I feel like a broken record, or like that it's like a stereotypical thing, but it really is. It's like a windy journey, for everyone, because it's not, the healing process is not super smooth and linear, and from, it has its twists and turns. And
no, that makes a lot of sense. So what would you say is your biggest or your best piece of advice for somebody listening to us right now that is struggling and thinks that they are giving their power away, or thinks they might be?
To make time for themselves. Because most people's lives are so bombarded all the time. And when you keep yourself busy, it's hard to listen to your soul. It's hard to listen to your intuition, especially when you don't have that practice. Like, you need silence, and you need time on your own so you can start building that muscle. So that's like the first thing. Make time for yourself. And I've spoken to some people where that sounds downright painful to them. So I say just 5 minutes a day. And one day you can journal whatever it is that you're feeling, even if it's just like to put your hands on your heart and just breathe and like check in with yourself. How are you actually feeling? Most people don't know how you're feeling. I can't tell you how many times I ask people, how are you? And they just say good. I'm like, what's really going on? They're like, they have to search for how they're actually doing, and just because so much needs to get done, that is the very first step. You can't get anywhere without making space for you, making room for you, and that'll grow. The capacity to be with yourself will grow. And I know that for a lot of people, it will sound downright painful at first, but we can't bypass that.
I really like how you mentioned, even if it's 5 minutes, because I really try to emphasize to my listeners, to my clients, about the importance and how even a small amount of time, it doesn't have to be this grand old big thing to make a change or to influence your life. I used to be the type of person that I'm going to change something and I'm going to change this whole thing. And at one point in my life, I had this 3-hour morning routine that quote unquote relaxed me. Then there was one day I couldn't do it. And it was like World War fucking III happened inside my head. And I'm like, maybe this is not relaxing. So yeah, it was interesting. But I love that. Like 5 minutes for yourself. Journal for 5 minutes. See how you're feeling. Take some deep breaths for 5 minutes. I love that. Like, it doesn't have to be a grand old big thing.
No. And I wrote a little book. It's a ebook and they can download it. It's free. And it goes into more of these because I like to keep things practical, as woo as I can get, like, let's make it real because we're here on earth in a human body. Like, let's make things practical. And so in my free ebook, I talk a lot about how to start making these very small, practical, simple steps. Everyone can do this. And there's about, I think, like 30 journal prompts that they can choose from that really help to connect to yourself and see what is in the way of being in your power or listening to your soul, because the next step of creating that space is developing deeper self-awareness. And so that's why I love these journal prompts, because they help to deepen that awareness and what's actually happening for you and within you.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate you speaking with me. Thank you so much. Now, I have an ending segment that I end my podcast with. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
I have.
So he ends most of his podcast episodes with these 2 segments, and I've incorporated them.
Okay.
The first segment is called The Many Sides to Us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each.
Okay.
Number 1, what is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you?
Love.
Number 2, what is 1 word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you?
Love.
Number 3, what is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself? You can't say love.
Funny.
What is 1 word that if someone who didn't like you or agree with your mindset would use to describe you as?
No at all.
Number 5, what is 1 word that you're embodying right now?
Power.
The second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in a sentence. Number 1, what is the best advice you've heard or received?
Love yourself.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
trust me.
Why was that the worst?
Because the person saying it didn't deserve it.
Okay. Number 3.
And it really should be trust myself, not trust outside.
Number 3. What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
Academic intelligence.
If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
She helped me stand in my power. She helped me connect to my soul.
Number 5. If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
That people's differences would need to be respected and honored. I don't know about the logistics about that, but that would be the law. And why? Because I feel that most of us, there's a lot of points of connection that we can have, but there's also, I feel like we could do a lot better with celebrating our differences and learning as a whole to be okay with difference and not seeing that as not being intimidated or seeing danger in the difference of another.
Now I have one more question. This is not a Jay Shetty one, but if you had the attention of the whole world for 5 minutes, what would you say?
I would say learn to love yourselves. Like really, it would be a lot of what we talked about. Like the importance of loving themselves, of being in their power, of letting that shine, of connecting to their inner wisdom. I guess I'm a one-show pony. That is absolutely what I would want to say to the whole world.
Well, I love that. No, that's beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you speaking with me and being on Manders Mindset.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And now, where can the listeners connect with you?
The best place would be Instagram. And my Linktree is on there, all my one-on-one services. I have an upcoming free women's circle. There's going to be a local one in Houston, and I'm going to have a virtual one for wherever you are. You can join in the world. And that would be the best place because I post everything, upcoming programs and one-on-one offers are all there.
Well, thank you so much. And before we close out, is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with? No pressure whatsoever, but I've been on podcasts where I've been like, damn, I wanted to say X, Y, Z, and I didn't get to. So I just like to throw the option out there.
I feel complete. I feel like we covered pretty much the core of my message.
Okay, great. I'm so glad.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Manders Mindset. Hey guys, Manders here, and I just wanted to share a few takeaways with y'all and a few things I just want y'all to keep in mind. Now, prior to Gabi and I sitting down to record the podcast, her and I did connect virtually, and she told me about her experience being in the cult for about 15 years. I knew it was a spiritual cult, but she did not tell me that she did this because she was doing field research for her anthropology major. But I'm purposely taking time to emphasize this because prior to finding out why or how Gabi ended up in the position where she was in a cult, I was even initially thinking to myself, how did she even find one of these? But that same concept, she found one because she was doing field research for anthropology, which, for those of you who don't know, I haven't delved too deep into my educational background, but I got my bachelor's in legal studies with a double major in sociology and anthropology. And for those of you who don't know what anthropology is, it's the study of human beings and their ancestors through time and space and in relation to physical character, environmental and social relations, and culture. So, for example, personally, my senior year at Roger Williams, I had to do an anthropological field research project, and I did mine on coffee shops. So I did one local coffee shop and a Dunkin' Donuts that was very close by the local coffee shop. And I did a lot of observations, and I would do field research there. I'd take notes there. I would speak to individuals that were at each location, go there at different times of days and different days during the week to get a real vibe and feel, to immerse myself in that culture. So basically, that's what Gabi was doing. And she was doing it at some spiritual organization because her second major was theology, world religion, which this was just really interesting to me because I was thinking to myself, how did she even find a cult? Like, I didn't even know these really existed, but this is just a real life example to show you how easy it can be to get wrapped up in different situations. So just something for y'all to think about. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of Manders Mindset. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I'd really appreciate it if you left me a 5-star rating, shared this episode with someone you think would benefit from it, and left me a review. Also, I have created a Manders Mindset Instagram page that is in the show notes. You can follow along there. I will be posting exclusive reels of different podcast episodes. And stay tuned for the next episode of Manders Mindset.